this continent can let you know a bit about themselves and about paganism in Australia. My name is Don Frew. I'm the facilitator, and I'm a pagan from the US, so that's all I'm going to be saying. The panelists have decided by their own lot or rune draw or whatever method you order speakers. And the first up is Shay de Montfort. Each panelist will be speaking for about 12 minutes, introducing themselves and saying a bit about what it's like being a pagan in modern Australia and what their experience of the Parliament is and what they've taken away from it. So first up, Shay, if you will please.
I'll get you and your little dog too! Greetings!
Greetings!
Honestly, this is the way that we've been pictured. For centuries, for 400 years, they've thought of us this way. And they've never gone to talk beneath the mask. What's under the mask? Who am I? They asked us to introduce ourselves. So let's shed some skin, do some PTSD, and see who really is underneath. All of the misconception, all of the lies, all of the things that told us about what witches are. Myself, I'm just a mother of two. I'm Shay. If you want to get to know me, spend some time with me. Hey, I've done a lot with the Australian pagan community. If I stand here, can you actually hear me better?
Yes, and see you better.
Talk into the microphone.
Oh, that's better. I've been involved in the Australian pagan community in Australia here for about 20 years. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. But what I want to do very briefly today is not so much talk about me. I want to sort of go through 8 big misconceptions about the craft, things that aren't true, a couple of things that are true about us. Let's flick through them quickly because we've only got 10 minutes. And at the end, if you've got any questions, we can answer those. So we have these popular witch images that are based on Margaret Hamilton and The Wizard of Oz or Stephen King style horror movies. And Hollywood. Hollywood gives us a real bad rap. But are these accusations about witchcraft true? I mean, during the 1970s, we had a plethora of these magazines come out with all of these sensational stories about witchcraft and paganism. You know, unfortunately, the truth doesn't sell papers. Right? So they sensationalised it because, hey, it made good press. And even Shakespeare was guilty of the propaganda thing. If you read his early works before King James I came into England, they were very pro-pagan and pro-magic and pro-witchcraft. But when the witch hunt started with King James, he flicked, and we had Macbeth. And oh my goodness, you know, if we could have got 3 of us cackling around the cauldron, you would have gone straight away, I know what they are. Right? But Shakespeare reversed his propaganda line later. Why? What we want to do is put you in the judgment seat. Are any of these misconceptions about witches true? Right? How will they stand up under cross-examination? So let's have a look at popular misconception 1. What does it mean to be a witch? Right? It's come to convey a person who's bent on nastiness, and sometimes they'll just change the first letter to B. Right? If you have a look at the fear that's actually associated with the word, where do people get that fear of that actual word witch from? If you have a look at the dictionary definitions of the word witch, they're not very flattering. A female sorcerer, magician, somebody who's bent on working with the devil, an ugly or an evil-looking old witch, I'm really not comfortable with that. A fascinatingly attractive and beautiful, charming, young appearing woman, okay, all right, I'll wear that one. But in wickedness, I mean, honestly, the dictionary doesn't help our cause. They've taken the popular misconceptions and put them in as the dictionary definitions. See, when you're defining a person's spirituality, you've really got to ask them about it. So let's have a look at how we define our own spirituality. Not the bad press that's been given, and believe me, ill definitions of witches continue today in Nigeria and Papua New Guinea. I don't know if you read the papers about the witch slaughters over there, and massive amount of children that are being killed because they're being accused of these negative forms of witchcraft. See, while some have it forced on them by society, and some were given definitions from papers, others embrace it. So are witches spiteful and evil? Do we hex and curse other people? Well, there's no point trying to tell you that there's no such thing as a hex or a curse. You've only got to go over to Bali and see them selling them on the streets there. But anybody who has ever practiced magic knows that there is a whole field of like Newtonian physics involved, right? That is like reaction, action, reaction, and cost. Right? That is what the threefold law is. Not like it's popularised in some books by people who don't really understand it. Essentially what that means is the first time you ever try to do something that's not nice towards another person, it will come back and bite you on the bum so hard, you'll never do it again. So any practising witch is not bent on anything that is spiteful, nasty and evil. Are witches a lunatic fringe group? No, we're not. When you actually stop to have a look at the areas of the world that are occupied by people who practice indigenous magic, you'll soon realise we're actually the biggest religion in the world. It takes in areas of Asia, Africa, Middle Europe, as well as India, all practice some form of what would be defined as witchcraft. I mean, apart from witchcraft actually being the indigenous practices of Middle Europe that are now, for the first time last year, being taxed as a taxable service to the community in Russia and Romania. Now, are witches Satanists? No, we're definitely not. Witches do not believe in evil, the devil or Satan or hell. We see that as unnatural. Satanism is a form of Christianity. It's inverted Christianity. I'm not being flippant when I say that, but if you have a look at a satanic rite, it is the Catholic Mass inverted. It has got nothing to do with witchcraft itself. The images of what Satanism is that linked it to witchcraft actually come from a document called the Malleus Maleficarum, which was printed in 1486 to 87. Witchcraft does not adopt any harmful dogma from any other religion, although witchcraft is possibly the most inclusive belief system in all the world. Right? We will take anything that's useful and beneficial. We include anybody's deity. Right? Witches don't worship evil because there isn't anything evil in nature. Many of the practitioners of the craft are herbalists, and they find ways to actually work with the cycles and the spirits behind these cycles of nature. So who do we worship? We worship the cycles of nature, the aspects of nature personified, right? And in polarity. We have a goddess and a god. Right? Very flippantly, these are represented on the pentagram, the forces of nature as earth, air, fire and water. Are witches light workers or are they dark workers? Well, because they work with all polarities in nature, they work with both. They see the point of power as the I Ching does. The point of power exists in the middle, not by going out to any one extreme. Is the pentagram the symbol of the devil? You'd be surprised how many times people see my little innocuous pentagram and go, oh, you're a Satanist. Thank goodness for the Da Vinci Code, is all I can say. Because now people know that it's the phi ratio. It's a symbol of the phi ratio. I won't go into too much mathematics. Very flippantly, the pentagram is on a superficial level, earth, air, fire, water and spirit, and a symbol of that. But it is the symbol of the subtle reproductive forces of nature that give our craft power, right? Which the mathematics of is the phi ratio, 1 is to 0.618. Right? That is the way that nature reproduces itself. And you can see it reflected in all of nature. If you have a look at, also, how do we get the pentagram associated with witchcraft? It's generally through Pythagoras. Pythagoras is remembered for his mathematics, not his magic. But Pythagoras was a brilliant magician, and he had a goddess called Hygeia, and the pentagram became the symbol of not only his belief system, but also of hygiene. So he actually had lots of churches and lots of hospitals originally having the pentagram as their symbol. Churches were actually originally built with pentagrams in their foundations, as it represented the 5 points of faith. Right? Frankness, fellowship, purity and courtesy, which was adopted by Christian knights. So that's the mathematics, and I won't go into that now behind the pentagram. But suffice to say, it's also in this spy spiral that we see represented in nature. Right? It's the way flowers bud. All flowers, all five petal flowers are actually 2 pentagrams together. Right? And we can see it in things like moth wings, fish scales, pineapple spirals, the spirals inside a sunflower, pine cones, and also lightning actually branches at that 0.618 in the pentagram ratio. Right, we're getting the wind up. So what I'd like to do is very quickly flip through some of these. Does the Bible prohibit witchcraft? That's a biggie. No, it doesn't. It's only, the word witch is only seen once in the Bible, and it's in Exodus there saying, you shall not preserve a witch alive amongst you. And it's translated in other parts of the Bible as enchanter. But that word actually, when you translate it correctly, is poisoner, or one who poisons. So you can see a newly forming society wouldn't want that word in there. It got mistranslated again by King James for political reasons. Right? And the witches in the Bible are actually approved. There is no negative case of witchcraft in the Bible. Yeah. This is a biggie. Do we sacrifice our kids? No. Not even when they misbehave. Being people who worship the cycles of nature, our children are sacred to us. The whole point of what we do is to make sure that the young are there to continue on. We worship these reproductive cycles in nature, and therefore our children are our most sacred thing. The adults who are fully empowered and working with these cycles of nature do have the responsibility to protect the children. So, seeing as how we're getting the wind up, I won't continue on with some of the things that we do. Like, do we have implements and practice magic? Yes. Do we dance naked in some of our sabbats? Yes, we do, occasionally. Being naked is our sacred ritual robe. Right? We dress ourselves in the sky, so there's nothing between the gods and us. That there is no, because clothes always tell you something about a person, right? And it creates class and distinction. So when we stand in a circle, there is no head, and there is no distinction about who's high or low. Right? If we've got nothing to hide, is the other thing. Why then? Oh, why don't we come out more in the open? Well, Australia was one of the last places in the world to actually have witch hunts. Right? And we promulgated pro-pagan propaganda against it right up to 2003. Our last witch hunt in Australia started in 1974, was authorised by the government and continued in Australia to 2003. Last place in any Western culture that actually had a government authorised witch hunt. Right, so we're a little nervous about coming out in the public because of that. We do have open rituals and open sabbats that you can come along to if you're curious. Right? As long as you treat us with respect, we'll treat you with respect too. And hopefully we can answer a few more questions for you before the day is out. So thank you for listening to me.
I was born in country Queensland, Australia. And I consider myself a student of the poetry of the universe. A language expressed in scientific story, mythological metaphor, ancient and contemporary images of integrity, body movement, dance, stillness, chants, and songs. I name what I do as poetry, with a capital P. It is recreating Gaian poetic sacred practice. It is the bringing forth of a world, as well as the bearing of a tradition. And the tradition that I speak for is Pagan cosmology. I am its author, and it comes out of a particularly southern hemispheric viewpoint. That is the perspective of a European person transplanted, whose indigenous heritage from her northern hemispheric ancestors was forgotten, yet latent in her body and mind. I felt torn between identifying my proposal for this parliament as pagan or as goddess, as my practice splices both together, expressed in the word Pagaian. I've always been more clearly in a goddess camp. For the 3 decades that I've been coming to know and practice an earth-based tradition. My primary search was for female metaphor for the sacred. And then for ritual related to the seasonal moments of my place, the expression of her creativity, and conjuring that creativity in myself. There was a time, and there still are places, where it doesn't have to be, and is actually impossible for it to be a choice between pagan and goddess. She was once the land, and the land was she. And one's being was not separate from the land, and is not separate from the land. The habitat, the place, is who I am. Some cultures don't need the word goddess. Globally, there is evidence that the indigenous traditions know female sacrality, be that expressed as grandmother spirits, or with female-based metaphor. The female is revered and regeneration expressed in terms of her. But most on the planet do not live in such a context. So goddess seems a necessary word. There may be other words, such as Madre Dea, Devi from Sanskrit, Divya, same root, means radiant in Indian goddess litanies, Tiamat, goddess mother of Babylon, Dione in Old Greek, Diana in Old Italian, Svana in Polish, Zini in Romanian, both late derivations from Diana, and is the basis of diva, diosa, and via Latin and French into English, deity and divinity. She is actually at the base of human understanding of deity. And pagan, as I understand the word, means a person of the country. It is related to place. And it is a place that is native with a capital N, and we are all native. Place these days with a capital P could and perhaps should mean, or at least include, Gaian or planetary, and extend not just to the planet, but to the entire cosmos. Earth is not separate from her context. Pagan cosmology is born out of a sense of not knowing my place much at all, which is also common these days, at least in Western industrialized consumer culture, which is a fate of its own. But let me tell you some story from my book. I was perhaps one of Earth's most alienated of beings. I did not sense belonging here. Most of the texts and graphics explaining the cosmos to an Australian and white child were, and still often are, told from a northern hemispheric perspective. The moon's phases were backwards. Sun's daily movement from east to west was described as clockwise. The seasons in the stories were always at odds with real experience, and this was never regarded as important enough to mention. And later I write, while at least in the northern hemisphere, when my ancestors had lit candles and sang at the winter solstice, though they called it Christmas, there remained a resonance with the land, a memory of something earlier, which this ritual was based on. In the southern hemisphere, there was no such resonance of the religious practice of the Europeans with Earth. And the children here of this religious practice inherited a poverty of spirit, a deep divorce from Earth, that few other religions in the history of Gaia had ever known. And later, the fact of my context being thus the southern hemisphere has contributed in the past to my deep sense of being other. Yet hence, in the present, this context contributes to my deep awareness of the reality of our Gaian country. That the whole creative dynamic happens all the time. The other is always present. Many in the northern hemisphere have no idea that the southern hemisphere has a different, lunar, diurnal, seasonal perspective. And therefore, there is often a rigidity of frame of reference for place, language, metaphor, and cosmology. Indeed, over the years of industrialized culture, it has appeared to matter less to many of both hemispheres. consistent failure, however, even amongst more earth-oriented writers, to take into account a whole earth perspective. A sense and account of the Southern Hemisphere perspective, with all that that implies, in metaphorically and sensibly, seems important to comprehending a whole perspective and globe, coming to inhabit the real cosmos. The term Pagaian suits my practice. It combines female metaphor with ancient roots, embraces recent scientific perception of our habitat, and is grounded in indigenous Western celebration of the Earth-Sun annual cycle. And it is a cosmology, because it is about this place, this cosmos, in which we are all situated. It is not a theism of any kind. A teacher of mine, Thomas Berry, identified himself as a geologian for a similar reason. I am becoming home to what I regard as my indigenous heritage, not taught to me in a whole piece, because it couldn't be. I was in a new context. I've had to rely on what I could remember, and some good teachers who assured me that it was in me as much as anywhere. I have been an inventor out of necessity, and the universe has come up to meet me. This is where we go to the screen.
Can you hear me? Is no one hear me?
Okay, maybe I'll use that.
Thank you. All hear me now? Good, excellent. Before I speak, I'd just like to honour and acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and my place and my unique home being in Australia, although I am from Queensland. I feel very much a part of this vast country, and I'm very honoured to speak alongside these wonderful and devoted pagans and witches. And I think what I really wanted to talk about is my work with youth and identity and coming into being of young pagans, as I'm only 21. And and how that my cultural heritage and inheritance really forms my consciousness and understanding of pagan spirituality, which of course is rooted in the earth and reverence and veneration of her holy being. I'm a member of a number of traditions. I don't call myself eclectic, I call myself syncretic, because in my mind, syncretism is done with intent and empowerment for identity and rootedness in this cosmos and the earth and my place here. I'm the co-receiver and weaver, as we like to call ourselves, of the wildwood tradition of witchcraft. And we define witchcraft as ecstasy-driven, earth-based mystery tradition, which, in all honesty, sounds a little esoteric, but what it means for us is that witchcraft is a tradition rooted in the primal shamanic indigenous European cosmology of the earth. And a lot of us believe that shamanism derives from the desire to be outside of oneself as a discrete being and have that dissolving feeling into the oneness and allness that is nature, and that is a very Dionysian thing, and you'll find that throughout history and throughout cultural understanding and the development of paganism, that we have come from a Dionysian understanding. Nowadays religion is very what people call Apollonian, so after the god Apollos, sorry, not Apollos, Apollo, the sun and the conscious understanding of all things. We are, we are discrete, we are separate in a way, but Dionysus, who I am a follower of, a proud follower, he teaches us that we are all one and that we can consciously and with ecstasy, so there is the ecstasy-driven, dissolve into one another and have the rhythm of the heart and the spirit drive us into communion with the divine. And then the next part of our definition of witchcraft is earth-based, which is obvious. Who are we without the earth? She's our foundation, she's our sustenance, she's our very reality. And the tangible and the seen for pagans is the direct manifestation of the power of the divine. Mystery tradition is a little difficult to define because, of course, it's a mystery, and that's what pagans love. I once had a group of Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, and it was raining, so we invited them in because we felt sorry for them. And we had a long chat, and eventually, of course, we got to religion. And they asked us did we feel fulfilled. And my friend and I, who was also a priestess of the wild wood, we said that we do feel fulfilled because we are utterly in awe of the mystery of life. And though we cannot logically or rationally define it for ourselves and for others, it is infinitely known within our heart. And that's all that matters. And they wanted to know if we wanted to directly know God, and we said we did, and that every day is a blessing, and the sun rises and we are in awe. Every time I see wind flow through leaves, I am in awe. My life has always lived in awe, and I believe that's how pagans and witches consciously live their lives. We receive the awe-inspiring divinity, and we realise that it's already within ourselves, and we have that Holy Communion, and it's tangible, and that's the beautiful thing. And they left saying, "You seem very fulfilled, we'll no longer bother you." And that was a beautiful thing. So I'm also a cultural receiver, I guess, or heir to Balinese culture. And Shane mentioned before that, yes, if you go to Bali, you'll find people selling hexes, but that is, of course, a different thing altogether. I don't speak for them. I'm part of the Balinese Hindu tradition, although I don't practice it, but I honour it, and it is a part of my identity. I'm also of Irish Celtic descent, so I don't really look Balinese or Irish. I tend to look Mediterranean, which is interesting though, because the utmost and most powerful thing for me is my connection to the Hellenic gods. So what I'm trying to hit at here is that modern paganism, and as lived in Australia, separate from the Northern Hemisphere and away from European cultural identity, is something very powerful, because we don't necessarily, we have more room and space to connect with other cultures, and especially the indigenous cultures of these lands, because we don't have the hangover, which is sometimes a problem, because European culture has become dispossessed of its own inheritance. Christianity, a beautiful poetic faith, it comes from Hebrew lands in the Middle East, and Christianity, it develops from Judaism, which trace it back far enough, was the indigenous religion and culture of those people. So for many Europeans, we feel dispossessed, or people of European descent, because we feel something missing. And so for a lot of pagans, our search for spirituality is the search for ancestral roots, and we find it in the West, or we carry it with us. I often say that the gods may carry us over water, but we carry them in our hearts. We have that power to consciously link with our heritage on this land and in respect for this land. So I applaud people like Glenys for doing the work of finding unique expressions of a Western-derived spirituality in this southern land. And for a lot of traditions that I'm involved in, the Church of All Worlds as well, which was transplanted from the US and is an understanding of Gaian spirituality in a sense as well. It gives us that sacred room to explore, as I said before, and that is for me the most important thing about modern paganism, that I can be a part of many traditions and it's all mutually inclusive. And so that takes me on to my work with the youth of paganism. When I first arrived, I guess, at a pagan community event, I wasn't very received well. They thought I was a fluffy bunny, which in the pagan community is not the nicest word, really. It's our only insult. And you'll find, I actually wrote about it in my book, because I had enough of some older people calling younger people fluffy bunnies. But to be honest though, a lot of young witches and pagans come to the craft through movies like The Craft and through Charmed, and it's that emotional response to something mysterious, and then they delve further and further and they realise there's true spirituality, and then it hits home, and then they've come home, as we in paganism often say. And so from an angsty position, I wrote a book. And it guided me a lot. I founded a coven in Brisbane called the Coven of the Wildwood, or co-founded, and then that was 4 years ago. But now it's stemmed into a tradition in itself, because now one of our priests has gone to the UK He lives in Oxford, he founded another coven in our tradition. I'm moving to the Gold Coast, which is only an hour away from where I live currently, but I've already done the work of founding a coven there. And another one of our priests will soon move again and found another one. And for us, it's scattering the seeds of what we call a very ancient tradition, the Wildwood tradition, but as young and emerging as its priesthood, considering all of us are under the age of 30. And for us, the Wildwood, it's shared in a place, and it's an astral realm, but it's also here in every raw, wild, untouched pocket of the green landscape that is the earth. And that is to us the Wildwood, and we share Holy Communion with it through our ritual, through our honouring of the Wheel of the Year, and through something that in the Wiccan and Pagan community we call drawing down. And that's something that I've had a lot to do with, is the resurrection and re-clarification of an ancient tradition, which is otherwise known as transpossession. And for us, it's one of the most holy communions, because we can bring our deities and gods directly into our bodies and experience them palpably. And that is one of the most mysterious things to witness. And so we teach drawing down, transpossession, and the other stuff of the craft: astral projection, spellcraft, scrying, clairvoyance. All that stuff is our inheritance, our sacred shamanic inheritance. As witches, we weave that with intent and honour for pagan inheritance as well. I wanted to briefly also speak about Australian paganism in its essence. And we've had, as I said, more room to develop in a unique and autonomous way here because of the separation between the hemispheres. But also, we have come up with interesting ways to do things. Like, I've been to a few observances here at the Parliament run by Northern Hemispherean Pagans, and it's funny to watch when they have to invert their elements. And the way we cast the circle, we in the Southern Hemisphere go anti-clockwise, as the sun rises in the east, travels through the north, sets in the west. It's different in the Northern Hemisphere. Our elements are differently placed too, and it gives us more room to think. We have more of an opportunity to question tradition. Tradition is a beautiful thing. It is our guideline, framework and foundation, but more than that, it should be a springboard. It should never be something static and hidebound that never grows. And the beauty of being a pagan in Australia is that we can move beyond that, and we can embrace new forms with the intent and clarity that is a part of being a pagan, because we consciously seek to connect with the world in a very conscious way anyway. So I'll end. I only have 1.5 minutes left now. But I'll end with just saying that for me, my identity as a pagan, so an honourer of the earth, I revere the earth as sacred. As a witch, I am magically inclined. Magic to me is my way and form of spiritual connection and co-creation with the world. And as a priest, someone who is entirely devoted to the work of my tradition, but also of service. And I do not only serve my pagan community, I serve the earth, and I serve her many inhabitants. And for me, I am honoured to have had my initiation. I am honoured to be recognised at such a young age by my fellow pagans as a priest, and that's awe-inspiring in itself. But for me, those three things are mutually inclusive. A lot of people wouldn't think that a witch is a priest or a priestess. A lot of people wouldn't even know that a witch is a pagan. But for us, it's all about the spiritual communion with the earth, and I think the conscious evolution of identity. Glenys spoke about conversion being the urge to be. Pagans exemplify that amazingly. We have an urge to be, and we have an urge to be seen and heard as a world faith tradition in equal standing with all the traditions of the earth. And I hope that through us speaking from an Australian perspective, the pagans here from the Northern Hemisphere find interesting clarity and new thought and direction, but also that the people from other traditions realise that paganism is here, and it's not going to go away because it's been here since the beginning of human exploration of the divine. So that's my bit. Thank you.
I am in awe of the commitment and the contributions of my fellow panellists and so many other people that I've heard over the last few days. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today and hope that I can, in my own way, contribute something for you to take away. I'm going to speak really fast. I grew up in Western Queensland. Now that may not mean very much, but to try and put it into some sort of context, the largest property, ranch, I lived on was 1,477 square kilometres or 570 square miles. That's only slightly smaller than Rhode Island, bigger than Hong Kong, about roughly half of Luxembourg or Samoa, about a fourth of Brunei, about a seventh of Lebanon and Jamaica. I did primary correspondence school and School of the Air. That means I didn't enter a classroom until I went to boarding school at the age of 12. I would have to say that I realised at a very early age that the religious tradition of my family did not meet my needs, did not answer the craving in my soul. Now that craving seemed to only be soothed by reading as much as I could about magic, witches, ancient religions and more magic. I was lucky enough to receive some Dreamtime stories from an Aboriginal man. He taught me ways of conceptualising the world around me. These early life experiences shaped me and defined my spiritual practice. I'm a solitaire. I practice alone, usually, with very few tools per se, and not very formally. If you read about the Hedwig tradition from the UK, I guess that's the closest correlation that I've come to. I'm inspired by my country. I look to it for guidance. Australia, as Billy Connolly says, it's a weird place. When the first European naturalist encountered the platypus, this egg-laying, venomous, duck-billed, beaver-tailed, otter-footed mammal, they thought it was a joke. It's unique, but could almost be viewed as a hybrid in terms of evolution. Now, similarly, I'm fifth generation Australian from English, Irish, Scottish, German or Swiss, possibly French extraction. So a human platypus, if you will. And sometimes people don't know quite what to make of me either. Another Australian native I'd like to mention is the lyrebird. I hasten to add that's spelled L-Y-R-E. You can find a 3-minute video of this filmed by one of my heroes, David Attenborough, on YouTube. In addition to having its own song, the lyrebird is a mimic, incorporating other sounds faithfully into its own expression. In this particular instance, the video on YouTube, it's a camera shutter, a chainsaw, amongst other things. And thirdly, again, the whole concept of threes, is the bowerbird. The male collects objects, usually blue, to attract a mate, and makes its nest in such a way that it actually resembles a portal of some kind. Now, I'm an eclectic pagan, meaning that I derive my ideas, my tastes, my style, my beliefs, etc. from various sources, and that I'm attached to no particular school. In that sense, my personal expression of my spirituality represents or resembles the flora and fauna of my land, my home. I'm largely influenced by what my esteemed American colleagues, if I may be so bold, referred to as the revival of the indigenous European traditions, but I'm also influenced by spiritual practices from other traditions, eclectically applying or reinterpreting the concepts or ideas rather than a direct misappropriation of practice. I will clarify at this point, unlike the avian kin that I mentioned earlier, I'm not motivated by a desire to attract a mate. I've defined myself as a pagan and a witch, and I continue to be open about my spiritual path, hoping that in due course the kind of ignorance we face will be eliminated, and the pagan path in all its forms will be accepted and be able to embrace freely by all who seek it. Having said that, I see much of my experience in the light of interracial and interfaith, attempting to cross boundaries and borders and establish common ground. In hindsight, given my work in theatre was often about first translations of work or about cross-cultural productions, interracial themes, etc. I have an ongoing magical and spiritual relationship with the Shiwa Buddhist Pamonku. The man who encouraged me to put a submission for the Parliament was actually a Christian. Some of my most interesting conversations about spirituality have been with Jews and born-again Christians. My partner's from a Muslim background, So it's a reoccurring theme for me. Now, I've also become a celebrant in order to address the needs of my community, whether that's pagan or theatre, sometimes quite similar, and to provide service to the community in general, or to any who want someone who can address a spiritual desire without formalising it into a monotheistic context. I'm a justice of the peace, again because I believe one has to be active in the mainstream community to break down prejudice. One of the first things most of them say is, oh, not what I expected. Now, I'm in the long and slow process of becoming a psychologist in order to attempt to provide a service to both the broader community, but again also to those within it that want to speak to someone who understands the alternative view. I was inspired to listen to Drake in the Men Who Love the Goddess panel when he described his work as a psychologist. I'm sitting there going, he's already doing it, that's so cool. Even the instance of my normal employment, if you can call it such a thing, has become an active devotion to the goddess and God. One of the things I often get asked is what you believe in, what you do. I always say that I follow the path of the goddess and the God. I'm watching the fingers very closely. And typically, this means conceptualising the divine in terms of both male and female energies, equal but different. I see the practice of paganism as a celebration of life and the cyclical nature thereof. I'm also generally managed to mention what I think of the big three: do as you will, harm you none, to your own self be true, and the laws of threes. Then people generally want to know about casting spells, which I always liken to the prayer of prayer. To me, spell casting is prayer, and prayer is meditation. One of the aspects of paganism I enjoy is the freedom of personal expression and the freedom to worship as it suits the individual. With freedom comes responsibility. You know, they're interlaid. And this is where the concept of service comes in. However, you know, you are able to serve the gods and goddesses you want, serve your community and society in general in the way that suits you. You know, exploring that's led me to here today to talk about something that I'm passionate about. In a general sense, the concept of having a spiritual path. In a specific sense, the concept of personal prayer and utilising what I call focus beads or prayer beads, if you prefer, to channel prayer and intention. I was taught the rosary, and that didn't resonate much for me. I always loved the beads. And then I saw the pictures of the beads used by other religions, and I was similarly fascinated. I read about witches' necklaces of amber and jet, and various magical stories involving the seemingly simple act of knitting and beading. And I lived through the macrame craze of the 70s, failed to take up crochet and knitting despite the best efforts of some very good home economics teachers. I read about knot magic. I lived in China briefly, and I saw all kinds of beautiful knots used there in various charms and decorations. When my mother died, 3 months after my best friend also died, I was lucky enough to have a copy of the Pagan Book of Living and Dying by Starhawk and Masha Nightmare and Reclaiming Collective to comfort me. My grief inspired me to make my own mourning beads, honouring my beloved dead, and in the process acting as a focus for my mourning period, and in due course facilitating a transition out of mourning as well. During this time I also made some simpler beads, honouring the elements and the guardians, and these beads ended up as a focal point in terms of finally stopping smoking. I started to talk to others about the concept of meditation beads and the concept of personalising them as focus beads. I use that term because I began to realise that the beads can have a secular application as well as a religious or a spiritual one. And if anything can be actually said to be secular, which I actually doubt. So, pop history. History of meditation beads can be traced back roughly 500 years before Christ. Some sources suggest that the earliest use of prayer beads can be attributed to Hinduism, where they are called japamala or mala. Buddhists and Sikhs also use malas, and the Baha'i use prayer beads in their practice. The other contender for the earliest use of prayer beads is Islam. It's thought that in the early Muslim era, loose pebbles were used to count prayers, or people counting on their fingers. They're known as misbah, sabah, tesbah, or tesbah. If I'm mangled that, I'm learning, you know, how to speak Arabic, and I'm not very good at it yet. The prayer rope didn't appear in Christian context until roughly the 3rd century, where it was first recorded being used by Orthodox monks and hermits. There are 2 existing exceptions in the prayer bead story. The Greek warrior beads, or kundalini, are a little unusual in the historical perspective of meditation beads in that they have no religious significance, so those don't talk fast. They are thought to have evolved from either the compa schema used by the Orthodox monks or the Islamic misbah. Armenians also have their own worry beads, again unusual because of their secular nature. The Christian rosary is a relative newcomer attributed formerly to St. Dominic in 1214. The Anglican Church created its own rosary in the 1980s. The most contemporary prayer beads within the Christian Church are the Lutheran Pearls of Life, which were developed in Sweden. Now, researching all of this, condensing it, made me appreciate even further how much we're all bound together, linked like the beads. I've read articles from various scientific journals such as the British Medical Journal, Journal of Alternative Health and Complementary Medicine, through the journals of mental health, early childhood literacy, holistic nursing practice, and more than I could mention through various religious publications, all examining the value of prayer beads. Okay, and I found many others thinking along similar lines. Eleanor Wiley, who's here, I attended her workshop, amazing stuff, many others exploring the same concept. And it seems to me to echo what we're all doing here, highlighting common ground, offering a tool which can be utilised by others, and also sharing in that an earth healing and connection meditation. Now, the concept of focus beads is simple. The process unfolds into a significant practice with surprising power, and the end result is useful, relevant, and a pleasure from start to finish. They can be as simple or as complex as their creator desires. They can be for ongoing use, occasional, seasonal, even as a gift. The beads can be utilised as a focus on a healing, a particular meditation, a tool for mindfulness, or to consolidate and focus intention. They can be designed and personalised for a specific purpose, event, or individual. Essentially extrapolating from established foundations, they're both a spiritual and psychological tool. Psychologically, as a meditation tool, the concept of focus beads aims to offer an avenue to deepen and explore our spirituality and potentially to act as a pathway for personal transformation. Now, to honour the Parliament, I've designed a set of prayer beads specifically for the Parliament, and I'll be happy to share them with anyone who's interested. Just email me, @prayerbeads, and I'll email you the piece that I wrote, and that's pretty much me out of time. Thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you all so much for being here.
Indeed, very diverse, but underlying it, there is a unity of purpose. A unity in our belief in service to the community, which both Gede and Fabienne mentioned. I would also like to echo Fabienne's thanks for the Parliament and our ability to be present here in an international interfaith area as presenters. Our American brothers and sisters have been doing this for many, many years. They've had representatives at the last 4 parliaments. This is a first for Australian Pagans. We're taking our little steps. We're going to stand up and be counted. Okay, a little bit about me. I'm solitary. I have been a solitary practitioner for 40 years. I've been active in the pagan community in Queensland for the last 12 years, and I've been active in the interfaith community for the last 8 years. So for me, this is my microcosm of the interconnectedness of the web of life. I weave these strands all together, and that's who I am. So what do interfaith dialogue and action, the pagan community, and pagan ethics have in common? How can we all be drawn together? The purpose of interfaith dialogue is to increase understanding of and respect for other faith traditions, which in turn leads to an increased appreciation of the other, of their values, of their ethics, of their practices. And in this instance, the other is anyone whose tradition is different from your own, whether it's a different strand of your own tradition or a totally different faith tradition. In interfaith dialogue, one is always conscious that the individuals speak for themselves and for their particular interpretation of their tradition. No one speaks on behalf of a whole tradition. And there is incredible diversity within each tradition, and within each group there are members who embrace interfaith and there are members that have no interest in being part of it. And that goes for everybody. and it's true in the pagan community as well. I was very honoured in March this year to be appointed as the Interfaith Liaison Officer for the Pagan Awareness Network. This is the first time that a national pagan group had embraced having an interfaith officer. Okay. As I said, I've been involved with Interfaith for about 8 years now, and I'd like to just tell you a few stories of how pagans have become more respected and accepted in the interfaith community. My comments are mainly directed to the Queensland community because that is where I'm based. First of all, it was very hard to break into the interfaith community in Queensland. In February 2007, I approached the National Interfaith Festival and said, hey, can we pagans come along? No. It's international protocol that pagans aren't accepted in interfaith dialogue. I said, oh, okay, I didn't realise that. So back to the computer, which I hate, as anyone who knows me will tell you, I am not a technomancy bitch. Okay, so emails all over the place, including to the World Parliament, saying, hey, what's this? And all the international responses were, of course pagans are accepted in interfaith dialogue. Okay, I'll keep trying. So, next year, February 2008, let's try again. There was an interfaith summit in Brisbane that was being run by the wonderful multi-faith centre at Griffith University under the directorship of Professor Tosui Hin, who is speaking here. He is a fabulous advocate of interfaith education. Can a pagan come to your summit? Yes, of course you can. We're in.